Good evening and welcome. On behalf of our United Methodist Association of Retired Clergy and Friends, I'm Harvey Martz. I'm a retired pastor from a large congregation in a Denver suburb, and Dr. Don Messer and I are the co-chairs of our 1,400-member United Methodist Association of Retired Persons, a group that's been advocating for the past 6 years for full inclusion in the United Methodist Church, and for us to keep striving to be as welcoming and inclusive as Jesus is. We know that our beloved church is in a time of transition and splintering and separating. In fact, I heard recently that somewhere between 7% and 14% of United Methodist congregations will vote finally to disaffiliate, become independent, or join another denomination. I'm sort of a history junkie, and I began to look at other times in our Methodist history when this kind of splintering was happening. There are many examples. From our birth in 1784 as the Methodist Episcopal Church, we've seen the following splintering events. The AME Church, organized in about 1787, 1828, the Methodist Protestant Church was an outgrowth of the Methodist Episcopal Church. The Wesleyan Methodist Church, another offshoot in 1843. The Nazarene Church in 1908. The largest division, and truly a split, a true division, was between Northern and Southern Methodist churches in 1844 over, of course, the issue of slavery. For tonight's webinar, it's been important for me at last to keep that history in mind and in perspective, and I've been acutely aware that in many of those changes, the movement founded by the Wesley brothers has seen a rebirth of passion. I stole that phrase from my good friend and colleague Ben Rowe of our steering committee, or as Bishop Tom Bickerton frames our current splintering time, we're in an occasion to move from rancor to revival. I believe we're going to see 6 exciting examples of those two rubrics: a rebirth of passion and a movement from rancor to revival in the spiritual leaders that we are privileged to be with, the congregations we're focused on tonight, all of whom are passionate and enthusiastic United Methodists, and I think are examples, the best examples of our Methodist heritage. The first speaker tonight is Reverend Dr. Jerry Neff, retired pastor who has served churches of 63 to 3,000 members in the Texas Conference, and then retired and came out of retirement to lead a brand new congregation in Jasper, Texas. He served 8 congregations and was a district superintendent before he retired. That is, he thought he retired. We're going to let you hear from Jerry himself about the context that he is doing ministry in.
Thank you, Harvey. I appreciate that very much. And what a privilege it is to speak to those who've joined this webinar. I retired in 2020, and it was during COVID, so I felt like I'd been sent to timeout. And I spent some time not doing much of anything until I was diagnosed with a lung disease. And long story short, 13 months ago, I received a double lung transplant. And since that time, I've had the opportunity to figure out what the next chapter of my life is. And I had very dear friends. I served at Jasper from 1994 to 2000. And very dear friends there, they're lifelong friends. We travel together. And so we've been engaged in this conversation since the disaffiliation has been going on, and talks about that. And so as we were talking about it, they were so overwroumed, because in East Texas, where Jasper is, there's not a lot around. And when they disaffiliate, there was nowhere for them to go to church. And so as we were having the conversation, it dawned on me that I've been given a second chance in life. So I, in just a kind of a casual conversation one evening over dinner, I said, you know what? If this church disaffiliates, I'll come be your pastor. I'll come preach for you. And they said, really? Because I live in Galveston, Texas, on a barrier island, the Gulf of Mexico. And so Jasper's about 371 miles road round trip. That's approximate, but anyway. And so whenever the disaffiliation vote came, it happened to all the county seat churches in that region, as well as churches to the north and south. So they literally came to a point where they're saying, what are we going to do? We've got nowhere to go. There were no alternatives in these smaller towns. And so I said, okay, I promise you I'd do it. We'll do it. Let's find a place to worship. We did not ask for permission or anything to do this. It was kind of very organic. We just said, you know what, let's worship together. We'll figure it out after that. So basically we came together and we worshiped. Our first worship service was All Saints Sunday, November 6th. And we started worshiping together and invited other United Methodist refugees to come join us. And they came from 8 different communities. Jasper, Newton, Buna, Rayburn, Bonweir, Comenil, Hemphill, Nederland. None of you folk know where those are unless you live in the region. But let me just say it's about a 40-mile radius. And so these folks started coming together and we started worshiping. Trinity Episcopal Church in Jasper said, come and worship in our sanctuary. We want to support you in this. They're acting very Christian about all this. And I cannot tell you how much we appreciate them. And so we started worshiping. After their morning, they'd had their morning worship. And then at 11:15, we come together and worship. This is our 24th Sunday to worship. We had 80 in worship on Easter Sunday. This Sunday, we are chartering as a United Methodist Church, the first United plant to be chartered as a United Methodist Church in the Texas Annual Conference. And I'm telling you, we're beyond the moon over this. It's given me second life. I've never been a pastor of a church where there is no dissension. We are of one mind and heart, and there is an energy there. There is a sense of we are United Methodists because we choose to be, a sense of real commitment. Our Bishop Harvey, is so supportive of what we're doing and encouraging us. She's been up to see us at Trinity Episcopal and to see the United Methodist Church of the Pines. And so I started out in a 63-member church. We're going to have 73 people join on Sunday morning. And I always tell everybody, I said, I'm back. I've been looking for this church my whole ministry. This is a place where the spirit is incredible. We're refugees and an old retired United Methodist pastor, and that's just what God specializes in. Those kind of circumstances, God's been doing that for centuries, and we're in a new place, and God's able to do some really new things with us, and we're excited for our future. We're even looking at buying a new facility for us to actually move into within the next 3 months. So I mean, I've got people in my church, I don't have to ask them if they'll do something. They come to me and say, what can I do? These are leaders of the church. These are intentional United Methodists who are deeply committed to the cause of inclusion and to the ministry of Christ. So Harvey, it's been a whirlwind, but truly, as we went along, we just figured it out as we went, what we need to do next and next and next. And now we're at the point of chartering, and I'm committed to stay with them as long as we can. I don't mind the drive. My wife and I are fond of each other, so we have good conversations all the way. I do want to mention a couple of things. Number one is we had to get to know each other. So one of the first things we did was, as good Methodists, we ate. We actually had brunches, and we sat down. We had no agenda except to get to know each other, because we were Methodists from 8 different communities. once we did that, then we started saying, okay, what can we do to get outside the walls of this church? Because that's really the mark of kingdom work, is when you get outside and you start making a difference for the kingdom out there. So our first thing was, we actually got our kids, there were 7 of them, age 4 to 15. And we made cookies, and then we took them to the local nursing home. It was Valentine's weekend, just to share a little bit with those older folk who didn't get out much, and they loved it. They absolutely were engaged in it. We've got some of our folk that go and they work at Newton Food Bank, delivering, putting together food for people to come who need that. We're constantly looking at ways we can reach out beyond our church to make a difference in the area. And so God's doing a new thing, and we're so excited by the energy of all of that. It's just a real blessing, and it sure energized me. One of the things I did, we're not allowed to know who our donor was, whoever gave me these 2 new lungs. It was a young person, we know that, and they were from Louisiana. That we know that. That's all we know. And I wrote a letter to that family and said, I cannot take away your pain or your sorrow at the loss of your loved one. But what I can do is promise you that I'll make good on this gift. I promise you. And the first Sunday I stood in that pulpit and those people were sitting out there, I said, dear friends, you're the way I'm going to make good on this gift.
Amen.
Thank you.
Jerry, thank you so much. God bless you for what you're doing. What would you hope people listening and viewing tonight, in all the situations of folks maybe looking for a United Methodist Church after they've been orphaned or have become refugees, what would you hope they would learn from the example of Church of the Pines?
Find like-minded people, get together. United Methodist Church is not done. We are just a new reiteration of what we were. And there's been a winnowing. I get that. But I think we're going to be the stronger for it. And our vision is strong. We're not going anywhere. We're going to be a part of the communities that we represent. And I would encourage retired pastors, if they have opportunity, to step back into the fray and to help us out in situations where they can't afford a clergy support at this point. We don't need money. I mean, I always said I'd do this for free. I never realized that I would actually be doing it for free at this point in my life. So, I got to live into that. But retired clergy, refugees, find a place to worship. Even if you have to drive 30 miles, it's going to be worth it in the end. So
you're doing this as a volunteer, except for getting mileage.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's paying me more than I've ever received. I'm blessed to be able to do this in a situation I am. And I'm able to offer them the skills that I have amassed over 42 years of ministry. So I'm the guy that's blessed. Every time I go, I leave there every time smiling. It's just that feeling. It's our calling. Everybody on this screen, every one of these panelists, it's our calling. It's who we are, and that doesn't end when we retire. It just takes on a new chapter.
Hear, hear. I love your biblical image of these are just a bunch of refugees and I'm an old retired United Methodist pastor, and look at what God is doing.
Amen.
Well, Jerry, thank you. God bless you. We're privileged to have next the Reverend Robb Hutchinson, who's been a United Methodist pastor 30 years in the Western North Carolina Conference. He currently serves as a director of church development in that annual conference, is in charge of the Lighthouse congregation program there, consisting of congregations being particularly equipped to welcome people whose former congregation has closed or disaffiliated from the United Methodist Church. If you've been following excellent articles by people like Sam Hodges and Jim Patterson in umnews.org, you have seen some stories about Lighthouse churches. Robb, tell us more about your context and what you think other conferences and members can learn.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a joy and privilege to be here, and looking forward to sharing what we've discovered. One of those ways that we really can be the connection at its best. And the Lighthouse congregation started really with the concept from Matthew 5:16, which reminds us to let our light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. And for us, that's the kind of the rooting verse that leads to that image of all these folks that have been separated from their church. And I saw one of the questions was about grief. And yeah, this is starting from a place of grief and brokenness for these folks, and but still have this incredible affinity to the United Methodist Church. And I think Jerry, articulated that very well of what folks are longing for and looking for. And we did a whole lot of listening to these folks back in the fall as disaffiliation began to happen in our conference. And we really wanted to look at how we responded in a way that wasn't making a bunch of assumptions about what these folks were needing during this time. And as we listened, what we heard more than anything is, man, this hurts and this is painful, and it's literally going through more than some people call it a divorce. I think some people have said, really this is a death in many ways, a death of everything they've known about what church is. And so the Lighthouse congregation concept kind of rose out of that. It came from a conversation that I had with Dr. Steve Harper from Florida, and we were talking about the UM's Connected thing and how our conferences could continue to work through that. And we started talking about, well, what's next for these folks, and realized that really there's a local response that was needed. And I woke up the next morning to an email, and he had kind of sketched out the big picture, because that's just the way he is. He thinks of an idea, and then boom, it's suddenly a whole concept. And his conference doesn't have my position, and they weren't kind of in a place to pursue that. But I've shared it with my counterpart in the North Carolina conference, Dr. Tim Catlett, and we just started dreaming about what this would look like in practice. And then we started talking to other developers around the country, and just with everybody's input, the Lighthouse concept kind of came to life, and what it looks like in practice. And so our conference and the North Carolina conference both launched very, very similar things. We have our own, contextual pieces of it. But for us, it's essentially, this place, faith communities within our conference that become a resting place. And those resting places are going to be filled with people who are ready to love and to offer care, and to provide a space that's a haven of peace and grace. And really believe that Lighthouse congregations welcome hurting people and give them a holy space to heal. And that imagery has really resonated for us to provide space and place. And a lot of the way that we chose to equip these churches really had that central notion of what does it look like to provide a safe place. Because the number one thing that we discovered and heard from people was if they are going to go and experiment with another church, the last thing they want to do is to walk into a church that's going to go through these kind of conversations again. And there's a lot of woundedness, a lot of hurt wrapped up in the middle of this. And so we shaped this around that idea. What would that look like to provide a place of safety, and a place of peace, and a place of grace, and a place where there's no pressure to do or to be anything. And if all you need is to come in and sit down and rest, and then that's fine. And we wanted churches to just be ready to respond to those folks and say, hey, what do you need? How can we help you? How can we love you? We recognize how much this is hurting you. And again, no pressure to do or to be anything, just know that we're here for you. And that's kind of the spirit of what's behind the Lighthouse congregation idea. What I love about it, even in its formation, has been very connectionally based. As I described, this isn't one person's idea. This is a way that we all shared what we were thinking and feeling and experiencing and hearing. And this is kind of what emerged from it. And currently for us in our conference, we've equipped about 125 churches, 275 people that we know of. I think there's been more than that that have vicariously, that's just who we've tracked through that have gone through the training. In fact, I had two more that went through the online version that we have of it this morning. And I know of two other churches from other conferences that have used this as well. For our process is pretty simple. There's an information part of it, and there's equipping that originally was a Zoominar that I did, and then we transferred that over to an online based on demand kind of process. And so, a pastor and some leaders from the church will go through that equipping, and then we provide resources for them to then bring it before their church leadership team in whatever form that is. And they have to vote as a church team together to become a Lighthouse congregation. And we did this because, we didn't want just to be one or two people within the church that are saying, hey, we want to do this. We wanted this to be a church-wide, collaborative effort for everybody to say, this is who we are, and this is what we want to be. And once they've done that, they go back onto our conference website and register. And as of now, and we've been doing this for about 5-6 weeks, there are 61 registered Lighthouse congregations in our conference, and we're pretty excited about that. And I can show you real quickly. If you go onto our website, it's wnccumc.org. You can go to the Lighthouse Congregation tab, and you'll see this interactive map, and there's the 61 churches. Our conference, our line is somewhere along there. But if you overlay disaffiliation pieces, it's a pretty cool spirit-filled way that you can see how Spirit has led churches to become a Lighthouse congregation. And so if you go onto the map, you can go to an individual church and click on it, and it'll just give you some basic information about that. I was trying to see where Lynda's church is over here somewhere, Central and Albemarle. There you go. And you'll hear from her in just a minute. And so the pieces of, sorry, I'm trying to come back to my piece. Real quickly, the responsibilities that we ask the Lighthouse churches to do. The first one is this concept of remaining a United Methodist Church. For, as I said, the number one thing that folks are worried about is walking into a church and encountering, all the divisive language and arguing and splintering that's occurred, and all the conversations that have come from that. And so this has nothing to do with brand loyalty to the United Methodist Church. This whole idea of remaining and committed to the United Methodist Church, we talk about it in terms of doing it for this season and for this time. And the biggest reason, again, is because we know that folks are hurting, and we want to make sure that our first posture is to do no harm. And so we ask for that, not to keep folks in the United Methodist Church, but just for this time and for this season, as people are trying to figure out what they want to do next, is that they can confidently walk into a church and know that that conversation is not going to happen. It also helps our district superintendents, know which churches that they can steer people to when they hear about them looking for a church. The second responsibility we talk about is that we're asking them to provide a welcoming space and a welcoming place. And what that means is to provide a place during this time of grief and transition. And for some people, it might just be for a season, and others, it might be, they might have found their church, for the rest of their lives. But again, the assumption is, we're not trying to get you to join our church. We just want to take care of you. We just want to make sure you feel loved and cared for. And, the extension of providing a welcoming place includes, a physically safe place to walk into and to know that there's going to be people that care for you and that are going to listen to you, that are going to love you unconditionally, no matter where you are, where you've been, or what you've, what experience that you've been through. And there's lots of tangible ways that they can provide that. Some Lighthouse churches are, in some places it's individuals that are coming in and they're helping them find a place to be safe. For others, there's remnant groups that are coming and gathering, and they're looking for a space to continue to gather as a group. And so some Lighthouse churches are saying, hey, you come and do whatever you want. We'll give you space and time and resources and anything else you need to continue to be together and stay together and care for one another. And if there's any way that we can help you, let us know. If you need pastoral care or you need help with being a part of some ministry that you want to continue doing, we want to provide a place for you to be able to do that. So that's the providing side. The next responsibility that we ask is for folks to offer ministry opportunities. And so this is things such as inviting them and giving them clear pathways to worship, opportunities to join them in whatever discipleship pathways they might have, whatever missional opportunities they might have, just to again, if you want to join in with us, that's great. If you don't, that's fine too, but just know that the opportunity is there and you're welcome to join us. I also know of a couple churches where the remnant group that came said, we've got this mission that's been our, Sunday school classes thing for, 20 years. Can you give us a space to do that? And both churches that I heard about just, man, absolutely. And how can we help you do that? So it's really just offering those ways to continue to be a church and to continue to be in ministry, whether they join, the Lighthouse's churches things or just help them to continue what they're trying to do for themselves. The next responsibility that we ask, and we try to keep this pretty, oops, that's not the right one. That's Manicam, is to organize the local remnant groups that might be coming together. That what we've discovered is a lot of people don't know where to go, and there's nobody in that area that's helping other people that are looking for a church to come together or to gather together. So we're inviting our Lighthouse churches to take the lead in that, and to, again, not to try to get people to come to their church, but to help them figure out what their next steps might be and to organize themselves together. So that's the kind of the basic responsibilities that we ask, and the impact of this has just been absolutely incredible. The most surprising thing that we've discovered is that it's given local churches a proactive way to move forward and from and through the disaffiliation process. There's been an incredible amount of energy that's been generated about this as churches post on social media, hey, we've chosen to be a Lighthouse congregation. You see people from their church and from their community chiming in and just being so positive about it. And it's given something for our churches that are remaining with the United Methodist Church, something really positive to be on board with and to be a part of. And other things that we've seen, it's given these remnant people really a safe place to go. And I know that because some of the things I've heard is some of these folks have said, when they walk in the door, people are mindful of what I've been through, and they're not pushy, and they're genuinely and truly welcoming to me and to my family and what we're going through. And have more time, I could read you 30, 40 quotes from folks. One of them I heard today from someone was that their original church that they were part of that disaffiliated, they actually before didn't participate all that much in it. They were occasional attenders, 4 or 5 or 8 times a year or so. And then, their church went through this and disaffiliated, and they began to hear what was going on, and they migrated to a Lighthouse church, and now they're more active than they've ever been in their life. And one of the pastors said, one of these people said to them, having lost our church, we now know what it means to love our church. And so this is one of the exciting things that's coming out of it too, is there's just this new and renewed energy for what it means to be the body of Christ and to be a part of something that's so much bigger than ourselves. And as I said, I think for us, the Lighthouse congregations is a next step for us as we emerge from the impact of disaffiliation. And I think it feels like it's given us an opportunity to be the connection at its absolute best. And it's helped facilitate individuals and groups to tangibly be a part of something that's more than just being a local church. We're a part of something much bigger, and we can see what God's doing in the midst of it. It's really helping us live out what it means to be the body of Christ. And really, just as the imagery that it starts from, it truly is a light in the midst of the storm, and it's a safe harbor. So thanks for letting me share, and look forward to any questions you guys might have here as we continue on this evening.
Exciting, Rob. Thank you so much. Here we are 30 minutes into our evening, and I'm energized and inspired already by the 2 people we've been privileged to hear from. Speaking of Lighthouse congregations, Reverend Lynda Ferguson is the senior pastor of one of those, First United Methodist Church in Asheboro, North Carolina. She says one of the most conservative counties in North Carolina. When she went there 9 years ago, the worship attendance was 150, and now it's 500. I think she said. She'll tell you more about that. She has, there's so many things I could say about Lynda. She's been a hospital chaplain, campus minister in PBS's special program for religion and ethics. Thank you, Lynda, for being here to tell us about your congregation.
Thank you, Harvey. It is so good to be with everyone this evening. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share a little bit about what God is doing in Western North Carolina Conference. First United Methodist Church Asheboro is one of the churches that Robb was just talking about. It's a lighthouse church, and being designated as a lighthouse church helps us to identify ourselves as a church that is open and welcoming to others, especially for those, as Robb said, who find themselves displaced because of disaffiliation. We don't pressure anyone or disparage anyone or other churches or denominations. Being a lighthouse church means that we are going to continue to be United Methodist, and so that those that come from disaffiliating churches don't have to worry if they have to go through the same thing again in months ahead. We're a place where people who find themselves needing a church home or can feel welcomed, that they can be safe and accepted and not worry about being judged and other things. Just yesterday afternoon, I met with a wonderful couple in their 70s. They had been members of another United Methodist church here in town, and they'd been there for over 30 years. A church where they had poured their lives into, raised their child, their son. They had made holy friendships together, given their money. They had faithfully served. The husband had served on trustees for years and talked about many of the repair and building projects at that church. And most recently, he had served as chair of the church council. The wife told me she had been on many committees too, including staff parish. And then the church just recently voted in the last month or so to disaffiliate, with many difficult conversations and many different difficult meetings while he is, and as he was the church council chair during all of those conversations. Very painful. At the end of our conversation yesterday, they thanked me for First Asheboro being a safe place for them, a place where they could be to come and worship freely and to serve. And they said that they needed some time to heal because the pain was so deep. And I told them, of course, you come and you worship and there's no pressure for anything. You just be. And then they asked me at the end of my meeting, says, well, can we join the church this Sunday? I said, of course. And so they are joining the church this coming Sunday. I'm in my 9th, soon to be 10th year of appointment here. We are a very traditional downtown church. Jim, I think can you show the first 2 slides real quick? And that way you'll get an idea of what the church looks like. It's a church that's in the middle of town, the county seat. And I came here in 2014, and the church was in very steep decline. It had been a very, yeah, there we go. So there's the church itself. You can see it's a very traditional old building. And then there's a picture of our sanctuary. And that was a Christmas service not too long ago. Okay. All right. Thanks, Jim. We'll hold up on those others just for a minute. But the church in the past has been filled, as a lot of first churches are the owners of local mills and businesses, presidents of the bank, lawyers, doctors, educators, city, county officials. It was known, as a lot of first churches are, as the upper class country club church. And they have a rich history of witness and faithfulness and influence in this community. And over the years, though, the congregation aged, and with very few families and young adults remaining. And when I came here, there were about 7 to 8 children on roll. And two of the families told me when I came, says, so nice to meet you, but we're getting ready to leave, which would have left about 4 children and youth. Average attendance at that time, as Harvey said, was about 150 to 160, right around that time. We are located in the middle of North Carolina, and we're home at the home of the North Carolina Zoo. We are the county seat, and probably, if not the most, we're certainly at the top list of the conservative counties in North Carolina. The church, however, has always been deeply Methodist, and they have always been on the front of social justice issues. They have always been a church that was working for justice for others in whatever ways that they were called to do so. We have worked recently with our sister church, St. Luke United Methodist Church, on racial reconciliation. We are the oldest predominantly white church of all denominations in town, and St. Luke is the oldest predominantly Black church of all denominations here in town. And so we've partnered together to do some work together. It's just been really beautiful. But in the last past 9 years or so, the church made a commitment to be a church that is inclusive and affirming of all people, seeing people in the image of God that everyone is created in, and really living into that and treating everyone as Christ expects us to do so. And so on Sunday mornings, for example, it is common to find a multi-millionaire sitting next to a housing insecure person, worshiping the same God as equals, both created in God's image, and it is truly a beautiful sight. We are one of 2 churches in the area that are LGBTQIA affirming, the other being the local Episcopal church. There are lots of Methodist churches around us, and many of them are disaffiliating. We have people who attend here at First Now who had left church, who had given up on ever finding a church to be part of, and now they have a church home due to the intentionality of the church as a whole to be inclusive and loving for everyone. Last Christmas Eve, this is a story I'll tell you real quick. A young mom came to me after one of our services, and she was just crying, tears in her eyes, and she was just crying, and she said, you don't really know us, you don't know our story. Our family was so hurt at another church that we vowed never to step inside a church building ever again. And she said it was so difficult because we want our children to be raised in church. And she told me that her 15-year-old son, who has identified as gay, had been hurt so deeply in that church. And as a mom, seeing the hurt that other Christians caused her son, she said, I had pretty much given up on church and almost gave up on God. She then thanked me for the gift that they could come to church here and worship and have the gift of worshiping as a family on Christmas Eve. And then that family will be joining the church in a couple of weeks as well. So praise be to God. First United Methodist Church Asheboro made the decision to be an open church and committed themselves to this call from God. They put many resources into what we do. We converted an old bank building. So Jim, you can show that picture, those pictures now. We converted an old bank building. I'm sitting in that building right here. This is our worship center for the modern worship. We converted an old bank building next to the church for modern worship with financial and other support of the traditional service. The traditional service was very supportive of this work. We painted a mural on a children's hall, renovated a huge room under the sanctuary for the youth. We hired children and youth staff and redesigned how we disciple our children and youth. We really poured in a lot of resources. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Jim. Okay, that's the modern worship center that was created. We've renovated this building actually twice because we ran out of room. Our first Sunday in this building, we were praying as a group that, Lord, just send 50 people, and such a pitiful prayer. And on that first Sunday, we had 187 people, and we've been growing ever since. And we now have about 70 children and youth on roll here at First. And prior to the tragedy of COVID, we were just at the 500 marker of average attendance in worship. And we were about to push over that marker, but we're still rebuilding from COVID, but there are signs of life everywhere. We're doing over 300 now, and we expect to continue to climb. We started a Monday night dinner church and to feed the homeless and housing insecure, which includes an informal coffee house style service on Monday nights. And so you can go to the next slide, Jim. There we go. There's the modern worship. And okay, go ahead. And this is the second renovation. And so you can see we've outgrown this space again. And so we're working with Wesley Community Development in our conference that helps us redesign our buildings and our spaces. We're trying to decide what's our next step. So, what a great problem to have. Then with the help of the Western North Carolina Conference Office of Church Development, go ahead to the next slide. Which Robb is the director, and support from Wesley Community Development and also the Duke Endowment. Our latest project is the renovation of a closed United Methodist Church in North Asheboro. They closed the church in 2018. The congregation had gotten down to about 20 people, and they decided to close. And so that property became available. And so we have taken that property. The conference has given that property to us, and it's been converted into a homeless shelter for women and families. It opened last fall with 12 beds, and soon will be expanded to about 54 beds. A young mom living in her car with a 2-month-old child just moved in this past week. So thanks. That's good for the slides. Thanks. So this mom with her 2-month-old child is now living in this shelter. All of this is a resurrection story, and there is so much hope in the church today. It requires, though, that we're open to God, that we're bold, that we listen, that we look to see what God is doing, that we join God in God's work, and that we are willing to change. This old church made a commitment to change, and because they did, God has done some great fruit. Recently, I wrote a grant for something else and had to count the number of funerals that I've done here at First since I've been here, and I've done 176 funerals. The church would probably be on the way to being closed in a few years if the church had not made a commitment to love all people and to accept all people, regardless, and being able to see everyone in the image of God. And so because they've made that commitment, God has done a great work. They've been willing to change as God, has led us, and we've been courageous for the work, for the good of others, and to love God and our neighbors, to be open and affirming of all people, including LGBTQIA. And that's come with some cost at first. Of course, it's not been easy. There's been some backlash here in this conservative county. After General Conference 2019, we were on the front page of the local newspaper, and that talked about our inclusivity, and it said First Methodist vows to remain an inclusive church. And that day we received threats, and we had to have the police to patrol the church, and I had to hide away in the parsonage. I, like you, all of you, believe that the church is still the primary place where disciples are made and the primary agent for change, for good in the world. So God is at work, and we continue to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And I'm just so blessed to be just a small part of it. And I am blessed every single day.
Thank you, Lynda. God bless you. God bless the congregation you have witnessed to. And thank you, God, for resurrection stories and spirit-filled congregations. Reverend Dr. Todd Jordan has been an ordained United Methodist elder for 20 years, currently serves Strawbridge United Methodist Church In the Houston area, that congregation has experienced dramatic growth recently. Todd will tell you the specifics about that. This is one of several Texas congregations featured in an article in umnews.org by journalist Sam Hodges. Todd is passionate about inviting and reaching out to people who want to join and be active in a welcoming, fully inclusive community. Todd, tell us more about your setting and what you think people can learn from what's happening in your congregation.
Sure. First of all, thank you for letting me be a part of this. It's a privilege and honor to be here. We're in the Texas Annual Conference, where we had just over 600 churches. We now have 305. In my district, we had 49 churches a couple years ago. We now have 17. And in our immediate area, we had 7 United Methodist churches. We now have 3. That being said, Strawbridge United Methodist Church is unapologetically United Methodist. We're theologically traditional Wesleyan in our beliefs. We say a creed every week in worship because it is an expression of our living faith. At the same time, as of September 18th last fall, we are fully inclusive, welcoming and affirming to everyone, including the LGBTQ plus community. When we voted, it was not on disaffiliation. It was on that position statement because we felt like we needed to be clear about that first before deciding anything else. So when we voted, we had 1,295 members of the church, of which 283 showed up. The affirming position passed with a 74.1% majority, and it is safe to say that everyone in the room was shocked by that number. A week later, 3 fairly good-sized United Methodist congregations in our community voted on disaffiliation, and they voted to disaffiliate. Now, we had been warned that if we went fully inclusive, we would lose all of our older members and we would lose all of our big givers. So since our vote, we did lose a couple dozen folks, and some of those were very generous. But our membership has gone from 1,295 to 1,542. That's full members. That doesn't include children that came over with them. Furthermore, while we did receive a number of younger families, most of our new members are folks in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and several in their 90s. Financially, we made up for the money that walked out the door and added another 15% to our budget. Average weekly attendance a year ago was 250. We're now at around 500. Seen significant increase in our choir, music programs, Sunday school classes are all growing out of their space of all ages, children, students, and adults. Discipleship groups have been added. And those numbers are important, every one of them, because they represent individuals and families who were hurt, angry, grieving, mistrusting, lost, and in pain. And many of them, all of those emotions all at the same time. The most frequently used term by them to refer to themselves was refugee. These were folks that had been members of previous Methodist churches that voted to disaffiliate. Some of them were charter members of their churches. Many of them, some of them were on staff. Many of them had been chairs of committees. Some of them had had memberships of over 20, 30 or more years. Now, a number of those folks had said that they had stopped attending their church or rarely attended. Now they come weekly. And not a week goes by that they don't express gratitude for the hope and healing that they found here. In fact, literally last Sunday, 2 different individuals were in tears thanking me for just welcoming them. When I do meet visitors, I do meet with them as a pastor and want to be clear that we're not just staying United Methodist, but we are fully inclusive so that they know that up front. And once they learn they have permission to share, at some point, someone will mention they have a gay kid or great gay grandkids or gay relatives or friends. that they weren't comfortable sharing that in previous congregations. One of our new members is non-binary and has said to me that this is the first church that they feel comfortable worshiping in. They attend here with their mother, and mom's pretty happy about that too. Of the folks that did leave, several of them let me know how much they appreciated our process, that it was fair and transparent and lay-driven. And while they couldn't agree with the final position, they did appreciate the way that it was done. I had been talking about this with the congregation since prior to General Conference 2016. I found that the more facts that I gave them, it didn't raise anxiety, rather it lowered anxiety. And I always made sure that they understood that we were always one church, working through difficult conversations, but did not talk about one another or any conversation in polarized terms. After the called General Conference of 2019, it was obvious that I was in a very divided church and that we needed to come to some determination on where we were. So, and I realized we were going to lose folks if we didn't address it. So I read about a dozen books on what the scriptures say about same-sex sexual relationships, half from the affirming side, half from the non-affirming side, and started presenting to my congregation in groups of 40, both sides, as unbiased as I could, so they could make up their minds for themselves. They would be in table groups that we intentionally split up, and we had about in groups of 40. And so we had about 3 of those conversations until COVID hit. Then in January of 22, I informed my church council that it was time that we had a conversation. We took a look at paragraph 161G in the United Methodist Book of Discipline, which states, and I quote, "The United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this practice incompatible with Christian teaching." I said, we have to make a decision. Are we okay with that, or are we not okay with that? And that was the crux of our conversation and our decision. Church council came up with a subcommittee, or appointed a subcommittee to come up with a process by which we would have these conversations and communicate this to the congregation. And I'm happy to say that the subcommittee met weekly for several months. And at no point did anyone get mad or yell or get angry or and walk out. Every decision made about the process was through 100% unanimous consent. And when they presented to our church council, which was also very mixed in terms of ideology and theology, everything was passed with 100% unanimous consent. Again, nobody yelled, nobody got angry, nobody stormed out. So we had 5 church-wide information events where, again, I presented both sides of the interpretation of Scripture. And we let the church ask any question they wanted. Anyone could show up. We had a conversation about that. And then we took the vote. At the time of the vote, I did not disclose where I was in this because I wanted them to make up their decision without my hand being on the scale in any way. I wasn't sure if I was going to have a job or not after the vote, honestly. And I'm not joking. I was looking at other professions in case I needed to move on, because I wasn't going to, I'd made a decision not to serve a church that wasn't unapologetically affirming. So I looked around at the possibility of truck driving, because coming out of COVID, truck drivers made a lot of money, y'all. And there's a truck driving school right down the road from us. So I looked at that. So I was sweating it, but the vote came in, and since then, we've done nothing but grow, and people have just appreciated having a place to heal and to mend. And if they stick around and join, great. If not, that's fine. We just wanted to offer a safe harbor. So that's pretty much our journey. And yeah. And if anyone has any questions.
Wow. I'm just getting good chills every time each of you has shared stories. And I give thanks for your leadership and for what God is accomplishing especially as some of you have used the biblical image of the faithful remnant. Thank you, God. I am pleased to introduce my friend, Reverend Dr. Valerie Jackson, who is currently the lead pastor of the unique Park Hill United Methodist Church in Denver. She is the first woman lead pastor in that historic, spirit-filled, justice-centered, racially diverse congregation in Northeast Denver. She is described as a womanist-centered visionary faith leader. She is an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church since 2018, is frequently sought out as a guest preacher, as a delegate to the 2024 United Methodist General Conference. Valerie, tell us about Park Hill and what people can learn.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Harvey Marks. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I am honored and humbled to be here with the stature of colleagues that I am with tonight. And we're honored that you are taking the time to hear what we have to say about ministry. It's my pleasure to be the lead pastor of the Park Hill United Methodist Church in Denver, Colorado. We have been Methodist since its inception 112 years ago. And of course, United Methodist since 1968. And we are proud to be the Park Hill United Methodist Church. And we choose to thrive. We choose to thrive because we feel that we must exist and we must thrive. If we did not exist, we fear that there would not be a worship space for people of all races and cultures to come together and worship Jesus the Christ together in a safe space, for all who are LGBTQ to come in and worship together. We envision a world where all people thrive in life, love, and liberation. And to that end, what we are most known for, I would say in the last 60 or 70 years is the leadership of Reverend Carlton Babbs, who decided in the 60s, when it was not popular, decided that he and that community would integrate and become a diverse church. It was not popular at that time, and it was dangerous to do so. But he is known for going door to door, knocking on doors of African-American communities to invite them to come to the Park Hill Church. And as a result of that, for years, this church has been integrated and diverse, not just proclaiming to be a diverse church or inclusive, but it is pretty close to 50-50 white, 50-50 Black, and a lesser percentage of Asian, Latinx, and others. And the really critical part of that is it's also a safe place for families that have a combination of races and cultures. For us to walk into worship together is not unusual and therefore not awkward. There's no one staring at you. There are very little, if any, microaggressions or passive aggressions. And if so, and if it does happen, because we are human, right? And we have been groomed and indoctrinated in the United States of America, we are learning to be in relationship with each other by having teaching moments. Let's have those courageous conversations. Let's talk about how to make the atmosphere better, so that all people can thrive, so that all people can feel respected, so that all people can feel a sense of dignity. And an example of that is, as you can see in my video, it says PJ. So you heard Reverend Dr. Marks introduce me as Reverend Dr. Val Jackson, and that is my name, but my culture suggests that I be referred to by my position, either Reverend Jackson or Dr. Jackson or Pastor Jackson. But there are other cultures that are comfortable with referring to the faith leader as the first name. And so that we could all feel respected, I came up with the compromise of PJ, and PJ stands for Pastor Jackson. So you're still giving me the reverence of calling me with my title, but also with a sense of familiarity. So we do the work so that all can be respected. I have learned in my 23 years of ministry in total, and maybe my 12 years in the United Methodist Church, that it's critical for a faith leader to come into a faith community knowing who they are as a faith leader, being confident in who they are, believing that they have value to bring to the table, and showing up in the fullness of their authentic self. I have learned that if we don't show up fully, then we cost that community the experience of getting what it is God has placed in us. I'm crazy enough to believe that each one of us as faith leaders and as human beings have something to bring that nobody else can bring. No one else has the personhood and footprint that each of us have. No one has the leadership footprint that each of us have. And so if we don't show up, then that community will not get to experience that footprint. The next pastor and future pastors will not be able to bring that. And that is a great loss. So I think it's important for us to come and be unapologetically who we are. Unapologetically who we are, not stubbornly who we are, but unapologetically. And then we bring ourselves into the community with a deep respect and love for the community. Get to know their past, get to know who they are now, and then you join together in relationship to determine where you are going. And you live in the tension of the past, present, and future. And I think it's important that we become comfortable with leading intention. We have made the decision at Park Hill to recognize that each day is a brand new day. Each day is a brand new day. And so we don't look at our Sundays or any day as just another day. It is a brand new day, and we look for the Spirit to provide us with new things, new mercies, of course, new grace, but new opportunities. And we seek to capture that on Sundays and with our Sunday vibes. And so if you ever go to our Facebook page, look for the photos of our Sunday vibes where we're trying to capture the newness of every day. There are 4 things that we think are critical in the magic of thriving. One is bold, make a commitment to be bold, make a bold impact on the community, boldly go where we have never gone before, and celebrate life. I mean, life has never been easy, particularly for people who look like me and embody everything that I embody. I'm a woman, I'm Black, and I'm queer. You know, that's a lot. That is a lot. And so, but since the pandemic, life has been really tough. So take a moment to celebrate. And then after we celebrate, we challenge. We take it as our responsibility to reclaim and reimagine the Christian faith. So we challenge systems. We believe in liberation through education, decolonizing systems of power. If we don't decolonize systems, we can want to be progressive, we can want to be inclusive, we can want to be a church where everyone belongs, but will fall under if we don't challenge systems that are already in place. And an example of that is language. We spend about 4 to 5 hours thinking through each worship each week, because we're looking at the language in the music. We're looking at the language in our liturgy. We have to be willing to rethink language, change the language in the lyrics of your hymns, change the language in your prayers. Our Father might not be nurturing and soul affirming for everyone in the community. So be bold enough to make those kinds of changes and take risks, experiment. Don't be afraid of failure. Failure is your friend. We learn from it. We don't lose. We learn from it and we evolve. We believe in evolution, just as we honor the past for what it gives us today. What we're doing today will one day be the past for those in the future. So we have to be bold and create that foundation for those who are coming behind us. And the last thing I will say is have fun, have a ball. Don't take yourself so seriously. Be able to laugh at yourself, embrace those human moments, and have a wonderful time with your community. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. In your ingredients for thriving faith community, I kept thinking about Jesus. I think those are the characteristics, those are the values that he shows us, continues to make possible in us. Thank you for mentioning Cardi Babbs, who I know Don Messer and I were aware of. Our final resource person, panelist for tonight, is Reverend Mark Feldmeir, who is just completing his 9th year as senior pastor at St. Andrew Church in Highlands Ranch, Colorado. Large growing congregation, also, like a couple of others, located in one of the most conservative counties in the state of Colorado. St. Andrew is one of the largest reconciling churches in Methodism, has long been committed to openness and inclusivity. Under Rev. Mark's leadership, the worship attendance and church membership have increased. As the outreach program, Mark is the author of 5 books, the 5th one coming out just in August. I should disclose that Mark is our pastor and we have been deeply grateful for Mark's leadership and presence as our pastor. We are privileged to continue to worship at St. Andrew under Mark's leadership. Tell us what we can learn from St. Andrew, please, Mark.
Thanks, Harvey, and thanks for all my colleagues for your wonderfully inspiring stories. It's been great to sit and listen and to learn about you and the incredible work you're doing. Unlike, I think, many of my colleagues outside the West who are dealing with disaffiliation from the United Methodist Church, I think here in the West, we're dealing with a different context in the sense that fewer churches are leaving the denomination in the West, but more and more people are leaving Christianity in the West. And we're dealing with a different kind of disaffiliation. And it's that work that I'm committed to and that St. Andrew has rallied around. There are, I think, 3 really keys to the vitality of St. Andrew over the last few years, especially. And the first is, of course, a radical inclusion, as Harvey shared. Every weekend, I stand before the St. Andrew congregation and welcome them with some very specific words. What I say is that St. Andrew is an open, affirming, and inclusive congregation that welcomes saints and sinners, the believers and skeptics, the lost and the found, the wanderers and the wanderers, and families of all shapes and sizes and people from every point along life's journey. And I finish by saying, no matter who you are or where you've been, no matter what you believe, or even if you believe it all, you're welcome here and you belong here. And I have been repeating that same welcome message for years now at all of our services every weekend. And I worry that it starts to sound a little bit like a broken record to all the people sitting in the pews, but it never fails that each week I hear from first-time guests who remind me about how powerful and compelling that message is for them, and how immediately upon hearing it they felt at home. And I think it describes the kind of church that a lot of people are looking for. But I can't emphasize enough that simply expressing a commitment to inclusion is enough. Really, in the West, it's the bare minimum. It only goes so far. I think people can find inclusive communities outside of church in a number of different venues in the West. And in the West, a statement about inclusion doesn't particularly set you apart as a church. It's just the beginning point for a lot of folks. And I think a lot of churches today say you are welcome here because it sounds like a super Christian-y kind of thing to say. But too often in a lot of churches, I think what it means is now that you're here, you're welcome to conform to our church's image of what a good Christian should look like. Instead of meaning here at St. Andrew, you're welcome to fully embody the unique image that God has created you to be and to become. And so for St. Andrew, inclusion looks like it looks like a culture, a web of a culture that translates into really, I think, practical systems of hospitality. Do our ushers and greeters and our program leaders, and especially the lay people in the pews, do they actually believe and practice inclusion when they're sitting next to people that they don't know, or people that are first-time guests, or people who are really highly anxious about being in church because they might be trans or queer or an addict or a skeptic or, as is often the case, an evangelical refugee. And I think it's important to ask, are the people who are leading worship in St. Andrew, are they in some way examples of that diversity and inclusion? Are they modeling that in their very being? I think this commitment has to translate to preaching and to programming. Is inclusion clearly and consistently reflected in what's spoken from the pulpit in our sermons? Are we regularly offering classes and studies on issues of race and gender and sexuality and mental illness and other social concerns? Does our church sponsor a booth at the local Pride Fest celebration every year? These are kind of questions that deepen our connection to an inclusive mission together. How clearly and unnuanced is your statement about inclusion on your website? Because that's where people find you first and foremost before they walk in the door. And so one thing that we've learned at St. Andrew is that inclusion is not just a catchphrase, but it's a culture. And it can't simply be stated, it has to be evidenced in real ways. And that it's not just an outreach strategy, but it's a genuine theological orientation for us. Which would lead me to my second suggestion about the keys to vitality for us, and that is a deep, deep commitment to helping people recover or reimagine healthy concepts of God. At St. Andrew, I often say that there's a God in the Bible that many of us have never met. And this particular God is different from the God that a lot of people have met. The God of judgment, the God of rules and laws, the God that so many people have been told about and taught about. This kind of God who's super preoccupied with sex and morality and human sinfulness and getting into heaven and avoiding hell and the salvation of souls. I often paraphrase St. Augustine, who said, we imitate whom we adore. In other words, we become like the God that we worship. And more people today have been beaten up by Christians who have become a lot like the angry, judgmental, and coercive God that they've always worshiped. And so at St. Andrew, we're committed to reaching spiritual refugees. We do a lot of deconstruction and reconstruction around theology at St. Andrew, in sermons, in classes, in small groups. And I think this has been a huge factor in our growth and vitality. This time last year, I preached an 8-week series with the provocative title of Life After God. in which we reimagined the nature of God, the love of God, the power of God. And it became a catalyst for growth and conversation in the church, and led to a book that'll be published in a few months. Just this last January, I preached a series called Why Christian, in which we looked at questions like why Jesus and why Christianity, why the cross, why the Bible, and why the church through a more progressive lens. And it turns out that there are other ways other than atonement theory and penal, substitution theory by which we can interpret the cross in ways that are really, I think, catalytic for people. Along that same time, we did a webinar with my friend and author, Brian McLaren. We had hundreds of people on that webinar to sort of balance and bring greater context to that series. I think we all know that Christianity is in decline. And it's especially in decline among two different groups. Young adults, ages 18 to 26, and Americans who would self-identify as liberal. And the primary reason that young adults reject Christianity is because of the hypocrisy of Christians and the spiritual trauma of evangelicalism. And the primary reason for liberals leaving Christianity or not showing up to Christianity at all is because it seems so irrational and supernatural and anti-science and anti-intellectual and superstitious. And so, at least in the West, a lot of people are quiet quitting church. And so at St. Andrew, we're committed to introducing people to a God in the Bible who loves real people and loves real bodies and loves the earth and loves real problems and loves the real world that we all live in. A few years ago, I did a series on an 8-part series on the political issues of our day, like immigration, climate change, racism, religious extremism. And during those 8 weeks, our worship attendance grew by over 20%. About 250 people came to church that weren't coming to church before that series. And so what we learned through that is that young adults and liberals especially, they're not asking so much, how am I going to get into heaven? What they're asking is, what are we going to do about this broken world? And what are we going to do about this imperiled planet? And what does God have to do with all of that? And so that leads to, I think, the third key that I would suggest for vitality, at least for St. Andrew, and that is reclaiming a deeply Wesleyan passion for reaching people on the new frontier, which today, in today's world, means a borderless and virtual and online mission field. St. Andrew's online worship attendance is growing exponentially faster than our in-person attendance. On Easter, for example, we had 2,600 people in person in our sanctuary. We had more than 3,300 joining us online. Our average weekly in-person attendance right now is roughly 850. We're still about 80% of what we were pre-COVID. That's down from about 1,050 before the pandemic started. But our average weekly online attendance is over 2,000, and that's up more than 1,900 people since the pandemic began. What's interesting about those numbers is that 82% of our online attendance is from the US and 18% of those joining us are outside the US. And of those that are joining us from the US, only 11% are from Colorado. That is to say 89% of people are joining us from other states, from coast to coast. So how are people finding us? The word of mouth is certainly helpful, but I think also online promotion and very targeted advertising and marketing. So for example, the last 365 days, St. Andrew has reached 201,985 people through Facebook and Instagram, doing so with announcements, sermon quotes, video reels that we're doing with great success, and other special videos. And then maybe the question then is, why are people staying with us once they find us? And I think that circles back to the first two keys that I already mentioned. And that's a deep, radical commitment to inclusion and a deep commitment to helping people reclaim or reimagine more healthy concepts of God that lead to transformed lives and transform the world. So that's what we're up to at St. Andrew. And every day I get out of bed and I actually give thanks every day for being able to serve this congregation that is defying the popular narrative that a more progressive, inclusive church and a church in the West can't grow. And we're proving that wrong. And it's a blessing. So thanks.
Thank you, Mark. I'm so glad you quoted for us your opening statement in the first 30 seconds of worship. Judy and I have heard new folks to the worship service over the past few months say to us, when I heard those words from Reverend Mark about how welcome and how important a sense of belonging is wherever we come from, they say, I wept, because I have never heard those words in a church before. Most recent example of that is for a gentleman in his 40s, part of a gay couple married to each other, who grew up in a fundamentalist evangelical church and has not felt at home in church anywhere in the past 20 years until he heard that 3 months ago from Mark Feldmeir. Folks, we've got about 7 minutes, no, not quite that long, about 5 minutes for some Q&A time. We've got the chat room open. Some of you are responding to that. I wonder if also in the Q&A rubric at the bottom of your Zoom screen, if there are questions that people want to hear any of our panelists talk about, or if there's a general question that we all could address.
Harvey, well, while we're waiting,
Yes.
just want to make sure that everything that we developed for the Lighthouse congregation is free and open. Just contact me and I'll give you everything that we've developed. You can have it. You can use it any way you want. You can give you the imagery, all of our training material, everything that we've developed. You can have it. It's we're all part of something bigger than ourselves, and all you have to do is ask, and we're glad to share it.
And I think you put that your website address in the chat room. Jaretta is letting me know that the questions that have been asked have been responded to so far. Something else, thank you, Rob, for that offer. And Todd, I don't know if you've written up the process that you just described verbally that you went through over a several month period, but if there's a way to access that in writing, I would love to see that and maybe put that, and again, anyone else's contributions that you'd like to offer on the UMARC website.
Sure, I can send that.
That'd be great. Other reactions, responses within the panel ourselves?
Let me just say that I'm inspired by all the different ways in which our church is thriving, and the leadership amongst these panelists right here is pretty remarkable. I feel better about the future of our church just by knowing many of you who are going to be engaged in a long time. Thank you for your stories. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for the way you were able to articulate our faith in a way that is open to all. So blessings.
Right back at you, Jerry. I feel that also. Well, we're going to get you out of here by about 7:30. I am just humbled and delighted and moved at what I've seen and experienced in the last 90 minutes. This is, by the way, one of many webinars that our UMARC group has held since our beginning 6 years ago, and those are available under the category on our website of past events. We've only been able to do this kind of advocacy in the past 6 years because of the generosity of members and friends like each of you who are on the Zoom call. We have a slide. If you are interested and willing to be part of the support community, the financial support community, if you are able to make any kind of gift, the information is on the website to do so. We've had several contributions come in the past 2 or 3 weeks from people who've already signed up and maybe are part of tonight's event. The directions to practice your generosity are on our website. These are the giving levels that we've just out of the thin air identified, honoring some folks who've been in leadership in inclusiveness in our conference and in United Methodism. We believe that generosity is one of the spiritual disciplines of being a Christian disciple, just like prayer and worship and study and service are spiritual disciplines. We thank you in advance for your support. We thank you, panelists, for your volunteering your time and sharing ways you see God's Spirit at work in your context. I've been inspired and motivated and energized. I kept hearing words like energy. I love Lynda's term of deeply Methodist. Certainly has been part of my heritage from my experience with my grandmother, who in the late 1800s became a United Methodist Christian at a tent revival meeting somewhere in Arkansas, probably at that time. I think these leaders, oh, by the way, if you're looking or need to help others find examples of biblical inclusiveness in the early church, the example in chapter 8 of the book of Acts, where an Ethiopian Gentile man is welcomed. He's an outsider on 3 different levels in that story, and reminds us of not only Christ's grace-centered example for us. Grace is a really important word in my understanding of United Methodist heritage, grace and inclusiveness. One of my favorite writers says it this way: God accepts us right where we are. And God loves us too much to leave us where we are. I think the words that Father Wesley used for that are justification and sanctification, or prevenient grace with us even before we're aware, and then growth in grace. May we go now to embody that good news for the people who need to know, yes, there is a church like this that welcomes them just where they are and helps us to grow in grace and faith and service. Thanks to each of you tonight. Amen.